The moon rides high in the sky again, Caris. There is death in the night air. Your work begins.
You're listening to Classic Movie Reviews with Snark. Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on iTunes or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. So please subscribe when you're finished listening. You can also go to snarkymoviereviews.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. Today's movie is The Mummy's Tomb, 1942. The Mummy's Tomb, 1942 continues the story of The Mummy's Hand, 1940, some 30 years later. There's not much of a story here, and a large portion of the movie is clips from The Mummy, 1932 and The Mummy's Hand, 1940. While sporting only a 29% rating from Rotten Tomatoes, it is fun late-night classic horror fare. So let's jump into the show veterans and clip veterans. Actors.
Right, and I'm a Shakespearean actor.
Lon Chaney Jr. assumes the role of Karras / the Mummy. Chaney was first covered in Episode 5 of Mice and Men, 1939. Wallace Ford returns as Babe, but this time Hanson instead of Jensen. Ford was covered in Episode 31, Warlock, 1959. Dick Foran returns as archaeologist Stephen Banning 30 years later. Foran was covered in Episode 127, The Mummy's Hand, 1940. George Zucco returned as Andoheb, a man content to wait 30 years to extract his revenge. Zucco was covered in Episode 127, The Mummy's Hand, 1940. Frank Reacher played Professor Matthew Norman. Reacher was covered way back in Episode 1, King Kong, 1933. Glenn Strange, who later played Frankenstein's monster, had the hugely important role of Farmer Holding Horse. Strange was first covered in Episode 76, House of Frankenstein, 1944. Uncredited clips of James Crane as the Pharaoh were used from The Mummy, 1932. Uncredited clips from The Mummy's Hand, 1940 include Sig Arnaud as the beggar, Cecil Kellaway as Mr. Silvani, Peggy Moran as Marta Silvani, Charles Throwbridge as Dr. Petrie, and Tom Tyler as Karras / the Mummy. John Hubbard played John Banning, the son of archaeologist Stephen Banning. Hubbard was born in Chicago in 1914. He was a minor leading actor during World War II, but fell into relative obscurity following his military service. Hubbard is best known for You'll Never Get Rich, 1941, The Mummy's Tomb, 1942, Youth on Parade, 1942, and Duel at Diablo, 1966. When not acting, Hubbard sold cars and managed restaurants. Hubbard died in 1968. Elise Knox played Isabel Evans. Knox was born in 1917 in Connecticut. After graduating from Trap Hagen School of Fashion, she eventually became a top model. She jumped from modeling into newsreels to getting bit parts in movies. Wake Up Live 1937 was the first of her 39 movies. For acting, she is best known for Sheriff of Tombstone, 1941, The Mummy's Tomb, 1942, Hit the Ice, 1943, and A Wave, a Whack, and a Marine, 1944. While I usually don't get into the personal life too much, with Elise Knox I have to. Her second husband was Heisman Trophy winner Tom Harmon. Knox retired from movies in 1949 to raise her children. Her children are Mark Harmon of NCIS 2003 to 2017 fame, and Christine, who married singer and actor Ricky Nelson and is the mother of Gunnar and Matthew Nelson. Knox died in 2012 at the age of 94. Turhan Bey played the role of Mummy Controller Mehmet Bey. Bey was born in Austria in 1922. Bey was another of those character actors that could play a variety of ethnic roles based on his looks. In the early 1940s, he began acting in Hollywood movies. I wonder why he left Austria. It seems so nice there. He is known for playing in adventures and horror films. Some of his films include The Climax, 1944, Dragon Seed, 1944, which is a must-see with Katharine Hepburn playing a Chinese peasant, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, 1944, and The Amazing Mr. X, 1948. After a 40-year hiatus, he returned to television, and his last role was on Babylon 5, 1995-98. Bey died in 2012 at the age of 90. Story:
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
The movie begins with an old archaeologist, Stephen Banning, Dick Foran, underwhelming his son, John Banning, played by John Hubbard, future daughter-in-law Isabel Evans, Elise Knox, and Miss Ella Evans, Virginia Brissick, with tales of ancient expeditions into the desert.
Many people believe that we archaeologists are just a collection of old fogies digging around in ruins after old dried-up skulls and bones.
It has been 30 years since the expedition. As he describes the search for Ananka's tomb, the movie goes back in time. The movie shows clips from The Mummy's Hand, 1940. Traveling with Stephen Banning are Babe Hansen, Wallace Ford, a good man in a gunfight, Mr. Solvani, Cecil Kellaway, a Brooklyn magician, his daughter Marta Solvani Banning, Peggy Moran, and Dr. Petrie, Charles Throwbridge from the Cairo Museum. The caravan travels across the desert and into the mountains. They set up a base camp and begin excavating. Babe Hansen blasts an opening and they find the seal of the 7 jackals and are told by the locals it's a cursed tomb. Of course, the white guys jump right in as the natives flee. When they open the tomb, they find the sarcophagus is not sealed. When they open it, they find the body of Ardith Bey. In this movie, the mummy, named Kairos, is played by Lon Chaney Jr., despite the Boris Karloff image. They are amazed by the preservation. The time switches back and forth. They remove the mummy and find that he was buried alive. In modern times, Stephen Banning tells the crowd that the mummy is being kept alive by a group of priests led by Andoheb, George Zuko, and his servant, the beggar, Sig Arnaud. These two watch the archaeologist from above. One day, Andoheb catches Dr. Petrie alone with the mummy, and after distracting him with the mummy's pulse, has the mummy kill him. Ali was killed next. The mummy attacks Mr. Solvani and kidnaps Marta. Banning recounts the tale of finding the temple where Andoheb was trying to make Marta immortal. Babe, Wallace Ford, kills Andoheb outside the temple. The mummy knocks out Banning, and then Babe prevents the mummy from getting the Tana fluid. Banning awakes and burns the mummy. Banning, with his guests in Mapleton, Massachusetts, ends his story with the fact that he brought the body of Princess Ananka back, but not the mummy.
Nobody that ever went through an experience like that could ever forget it. Well, at least I had the satisfaction of having destroyed a terrible monster, and in doing so, rid the world of an awful curse.
Marta has passed away. At the end of Banning's tale, the scene switches back to Ananka's tomb in Egypt. Andoheb is still alive and is in the role of the old high priest, and he is briefing his replacement, Mehmet Bey, played by Turhan Bey.
30 years ago, an infidel sought to destroy me and to destroy Karis. Both attempts failed. The bullet he fired into me only crushed my arm. The fire that sought to consume Karis only seared and twisted and maimed.
Andoheb says Kairos / the mummy, Lon Chaney Jr., survived the fire and is only seared and maimed. Andoheb explains how the Tana leaves work and sends Mehmet Bey to America to kill the remaining members of the Banning expedition and all of their family. Andoheb has arranged a job for Mehmet Bey at a cemetery in Mapleton. At the end of his speech, Andoheb dies. Bey and the mummy sail to America. Bey takes the job and keeps the mummy alive with Tana leaves at each full moon cycle. Something howls, but it can't be a jackal because they don't have those in America. Bey gives the mummy the juice of 9 Tana leaves and sends the mummy to kill Banning.
The moon rides high in the sky again, Caris. There is death in the night air. Your work begins.
A few people see the mummy shuffling along. One man calls the sheriff, Cliff Clark, but the man is not interested.
I'm going to phone the sheriff right now.
Hello, sheriff speaking. What do you want? The shadow? You wake me up for that? Go on back to bed. You must be crazy.
The dogs start barking when the mummy comes by. John goes to investigate while the mummy catches the elder archaeologist and quickly kills him. Everyone heads that way, but it's too late. The sheriff and the coroner, Emmett Vogan, examine the mummy marks on the neck of Bannon, but can't figure the crime out. Bay sneaks around and sees John and Isabel, and he is quite taken with the young woman. Babe hears about the death of his friend and travels to Mapleton. This time it looks like a skinny German shepherd howls. John picks up the elder Babe at the train station. When Babe hears about the gray marks on Banning's neck, he knows it's the mummy.
What was that? The kind of grayish mark on Dad's throat. Must have been a powerful hand that strangled him.
What did you say?
The kind of grayish mark on Dad's throat. Clay or dust or something.
Grayish mark. A grayish mark.
Jim, the dog tender, takes a couple of shots at the mummy before passing out. When Banning's sister, Jane Banning, Mary Gordon, comes outside, the mummy dispatches her. Jim is in shock and cannot speak. Newspaper headlines are shown about the murder as reporters descend on the small town. Babe confirms that the story is real, as is the curse. The marks on Jane's neck convince Babe that it's the work of the mummy. Babe goes to the sheriff and coroner, but they don't believe his story.
Where are you going?
I'm going to find someone that will listen to me. Someone that will listen to me before it's too late for all of us. There was a gray mark on the throats of every single person killed in this town.
I know that.
And that mark wasn't mud and it wasn't clay. It was mold.
We'll look into it, Mr. Hanson, and we certainly appreciate your coming in like this to tell us about it.
Don't you believe me?
When you can't get help from the government, go to the press. Babe goes to a reporter in a restaurant and tells about the mummy. Bay is in the restaurant as well and overhears. As Babe tells the story, Bay heads out to get the mummy. The mummy is sighted heading along High Street, and the sheriff and reporters head after him. Babe leaves the restaurant and is trapped in an alley by the mummy. The mummy kills Babe. Bastard. John and Isabel find some mummy wrapping hanging on a bush. They contact Professor Norman, Frank Reacher.
What is it?
I'm not sure. But I think I know someone who can tell me. Darling, will you drive me to the university? I want to see Professor Norman.
This powder, which you say was scraped from the gray marks on the victims' throats, is mold.
Mold?
Yes, mold. Developed through so many centuries that it's almost impossible to calculate. And it's the same we find in this strip of linen.
What makes you so sure?
Well, in the first place, there's a distinct scent common to both of them. Smell it. It's undoubtedly the odor of myrrh. It comes from a tree known as the Comethera abyssinica, which grows only in parts of Africa.
So?
This reddish-brown resin is myrrh. The other test tubes contain cedar oil and sodium carbonate. Now, all those substances come from this strip of linen. Look. That mold and this strip of linen both came from the body of a mummy. The chemicals were used for embalming.
Norman confirms that the marks on the neck and on the cloth are mold and come from the same place. Norman says both the cloth and the marks on the throat have embalming spices like cinnamon, myrrh, and frankincense. Just need a little gold to pay for that. John has given his commission to the medical corps in the Army. He proposes to Isabel, and Bay, looking like a young Orson Welles, sees the woman again. Bay can't get Isabel out of his mind. Bay sends the mummy to kidnap Isabel. Like master, like student. His plan is to make Isabel his wife and breed a line of high priest of Karnak to take care of the mummy. The mummy has heard this story before and doesn't want to go along. He almost attacks Bay. The mummy shuffles to Isabel's house and steals a young woman from her bed. The sheriff organizes a mob to go after the mummy.
All right, now, men, I've asked you to meet me at the Banning home because we've got a terrible job on our hands. And it's going to require every bit of courage we've got to see it through. Whether you can believe it or not, the facts are here and we've got to face them. A creature that's been alive for over 3,000 years is in this town, and it's brought death with it. We've got to run it down.
30 years ago, my father discovered and violated a sacred tomb in Egypt.
A man reminds the sheriff that the new cemetery caretaker is Egyptian.
Did I hear you say something about Egypt?
That's right.
I've been out to the graveyard, Sheriff, and I was talking to the caretaker about a final resting place for myself.
Yes?
And the caretaker spoke all about Egypt and quoted a lot of passages from his Egyptian Bible. Then when I heard you talk here tonight, I thought maybe he knows something about it.
Is this racial profiling? The mob gets the news Isabel has been kidnapped. The sheriff and John issue clubs and torches.
John, give out the clubs. Give out the torches.
Come on, man, get the torch. Come on.
No tiki torches. At the cemetery, Bay lays out his plan to Isabel. She's not really into it, but is relatively calm.
Where am I? What are you doing?
There is nothing to be afraid of. Nothing will hurt you ever again.
That creature.
Caris, you have nothing to fear from him. He has brought you here to me because it is your destiny to achieve the greatest honor that can come to a woman. You will become the bride of a high priest of Karnak.
No. No.
The mob arrives at the cemetery as Bay is about to administer the Tana fluid to Isabel. Bay orders the mummy to hide Isabel until he can get rid of the mob. One of the men sees the mummy with Isabel. Bay starts spouting Egyptian curses. He pulls a gun to kill John, but the sheriff guns him down. The mob heads out after the mummy. For some reason, the mummy heads to the Banning house. John and the sheriff head into the house. The mummy knocks John down the stairs. The rocket scientists in the front yard start throwing torches at the mummy, who is on the second floor balcony. John catches up with the mummy and fights him with fire. John fights the mummy on the burning balcony and the mummy is winning. The sheriff shoots the mummy in the back and the mummy heads back towards him. The mortals escape past the mummy and down the trellis. The mummy dies in the burning house. Thank God that mummy is finally gone. John and Isabel get married and leave town. They have a big farewell at the train depot. World famous short summary: revenge is a dish best served cold, but this is ridiculous. I hope you enjoyed today's show. You can find connections to social media and email on my site at snarkymoviereviews.com. There are links in the podcast show notes as well. Remember, the show is completely free and independent. All I ask is that you jump over to iTunes and give me a review. It really helps the show get found. Beware the Moors.